January 11th, 1973. A day that would change 13-year-old Paul Martin Andrews' life forever. Paul was a typical teenage boy, living a life filled with school, chores, and the occasional football game. That day, a simple task of buying milk for his siblings turned out to be anything but ordinary. Unbeknownst to him, a blue van was trailing him, its presence ominous and looming. Behind the wheel was Richard Osley, a fugitive from justice, his eyes fixed on Paul. With the guile of a seasoned criminal, Richard lured Paul into his van, promising him a quick ride. Just like that, a normal day became the stuff of nightmares as Paul disappeared, swallowed by the uncertainty that the blue van represented. The last image of Paul was of him getting into that van, his figure gradually fading into the distance. And just like that, Paul vanished, leaving behind a desperate and worried family. Richard Osley didn't just abduct Paul, he imprisoned him, in the most horrifying way imaginable. The blue van that trailed Paul was more than a mere vehicle. It was the lair of a predator. Hidden within it was a box, a space so small that a young boy could barely fit. And it was in this confined space that Paul found himself trapped. To call it a prison would be too kind. It was a coffin, a claustrophobic nightmare that seemed to shrink with every passing second. The box was dark, a pitch-black void where time lost all meaning. There were no windows, no source of light, only the eerie silence that was occasionally broken by the hum of the van's engine and Richard's haunting laughter. Food and water were scarce. Paul was given just enough to keep him alive, to prolong his torment. His captor was not interested in his well-being, only in maintaining his control. Every morsel of bread, every sip of water was a cruel reminder of his power over Paul. The fear was constant. It consumed Paul, gnawed at his spirit, and kept him awake through the long, torturous nights. Every creak of the van, every sudden stop, every whispered threat from Richard filled him with a terror so profound that it seemed to echo through the box's confined space. But despite the fear, despite the hunger and the thirst, Paul held on. He clung to his spirit, to his will to survive. He wasn't just a captive, he was a fighter, a young boy who refused to let his spirit be broken. And so, he endured. He lived through every horrifying moment, every cruel taunt, every starvation-induced hallucination. He bore the weight of his confinement, the unbearable loneliness, and the terror that seemed to seep into the very walls of the box. Paul had become the boy in the box, a victim of unimaginable cruelty. Yet, in the midst of his ordeal, he remained resilient, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. Richard Osley was no stranger to crime. In fact, he was on the run when he crossed paths with Paul. Richard, a man with a shadowy past and a knack for criminal activities, was already a fugitive when he met Paul. Born into a family that was far from picture-perfect, Richard's life was a series of unfortunate events that led him down a path of violence and crime. His relationship with the law was tumultuous at best. His criminal record was a testament to his dark past. A history punctuated by petty thefts, assault charges, and a disturbing pattern of violence against children. Richard was a predator, cunning and sly. His tactics were as simple as they were sinister. He would ask for help, feigning innocence or helplessness, and then turn on those who were kind enough to lend a hand. His ability to manipulate and deceive was a dangerous weapon, one that he wielded with frightening precision. Richard was not just a criminal, he was a chameleon, changing his identity as easily as one changes clothes. He slipped through the fingers of law enforcement time and time again, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. His life on the run was a game of cat and mouse, a dance with danger that he reveled in. But Richard's past was catching up with him. His crimes were becoming more violent, more desperate. The predator was becoming more dangerous, more unpredictable. And as he stalked his prey, as he lured Paul into his trap, he was unknowingly setting the stage for his own downfall. Richard was not just a thief or a con man, he was a monster, hiding in plain sight, a wolf in sheep's clothing, preying on the innocent and the vulnerable. His methods were cruel, his intentions were evil, and his actions were unforgivable. Richard was a dangerous predator, and Paul was his latest prey. In spite of the odds, Paul found a way to escape his captor's clutches. After months of psychological and physical torment, the young boy seized a moment of carelessness from Richard. One day, while Richard was absorbed in a phone call, Paul mustered all his courage and strength to break free from his confinement. It was a daring escape, a testament to his will to survive. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of events. Paul, weak and disoriented, managed to stumble upon a nearby gas station. The shocked attendant immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene in no time. The officers could hardly believe the harrowing tale the young boy had to share. Richard Osley was swiftly apprehended. His arrest sent shockwaves through the community. The blue van, once an anonymous vehicle on the streets, now symbolized the nightmares Paul had endured. But with Richard behind bars, Paul was no longer the boy in the box. He was free. Yet the road to recovery was steep. The trauma had left deep scars on Paul, both physically and emotionally. He had to relearn to trust, to not flinch at the sound of a closing door, to sleep without fear. He had to navigate through a world that felt alien, to find a new normal. Therapy sessions, court hearings, and the constant media attention, it was overwhelming. But Paul was not alone. His family, friends, and even strangers rallied around him, offering support and love. He slowly began to reclaim his life, piece by piece. His journey was not an easy one, but he persevered. He found strength in his struggle, resilience in his recovery. Paul's story of survival was not just about escaping a box. It was about breaking free from the chains of his past, about reclaiming his life from the clutches of fear. It was about standing tall, even when the odds were stacked against him. Paul's story of survival was a testament to his strength and resilience. 30 years later, Paul Martin Andrews finally found the courage to confront his captor. It was a difficult decision, one that required him to relive the horrors he had endured as a child. But Paul understood that his silence only served to protect the man who had stolen his innocence. He knew he had to speak up, not just for himself, but for every child who had ever been a victim of such a monstrous crime. When Richard Osley, now a frail old man, requested for freedom, Paul's world was once again thrown into chaos. The idea of his tormentor walking free was inconceivable to him. It was a blatant disregard for the trauma he had suffered, a mockery of the justice he had waited for all these years. So he found himself plunged into a grueling legal battle. It was a fight that tested his resilience, his strength, and his faith in the system. He had to convince a court that the man before them was not a repentant old man deserving of sympathy, but a monster who had robbed him of his childhood. The outcome of the case was a victory, not just for Paul, but for all victims of such heinous crimes. Richard Osley was denied parole, his pleas for freedom falling on deaf ears. The court recognized the magnitude of his crimes, the lives he had ruined, and the justice that was long overdue. The impact of this victory on Paul was profound. It was an affirmation that his pain mattered, that his voice was heard. It was a validation of his courage, his refusal to be defined by his past. But most importantly, it was a beacon of hope for other victims, a testament that justice, although often delayed, is never denied. And so Paul's fight for justice was not just for himself, but for all victims of such heinous crimes. His story is a reminder that silence is the ally of injustice, that speaking up, no matter how difficult, is the first step towards healing and redemption. Paul's story is a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. In recounting the tale of the boy in the box, we are faced with a stark illustration of the risks that can be hidden behind seemingly innocuous offers of help. This harrowing narrative underscores the vital importance of vigilance, not only for ourselves, but also for those around us. Yet it is not just a tale of danger and deceit. It is also a testament to the incredible power of resilience. Despite enduring unimaginable horrors, Paul managed to survive, escape, and eventually bring his tormentor to justice, a testament to the indomitable strength of the human spirit. However, we must also acknowledge the long-lasting impact of trauma. Even decades later, the scars remain, reminding us of the profound and enduring effects of such experiences. Remember, monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they're just a man in a blue van.